1. Good news, the following story does not contain animal cruelty or animals in any way. Well, maybe the human kind, and does involve bodily fluids. I've griped about my former co-worker, the humanoid fart cloud, before, and her unique behaviors at her office apparently found endearing. Like her enthusiastic glowing discussions on spooning mayonnaise out of her various orifices, or her theft and sale of personal items left behind at end of shift, theft and sale of site equipment, inappropriate relationships, sexual harassment of co-workers and site employees, her no-call, no-show pattern, her inability to be on time, ever, and our office telling us we were all the problem, not her. The joys of an economically depressed era, leaving this job wasn't feasible at that time. Well, the following happened here at my site back in 2008, right before the aforementioned meeting. I'll let you judge whether we were being too mean. It was a typical end of my shift. Shift ended at 0700. It was 0715, my relief was sitting in the front computer room on Yahoo Messenger, and I wasn't going to see her for another 30 minutes. 0745 rolls around, and she finally makes her way into the guard booth.
"I'm late because I have my period,"
she says. I admit to being skeptical, her prior behavior with being sick and not coming into work, but then having a miraculous healing to be well enough to go on a date instead, made it rather suspect. I gave the pass-along info and made my way home. Second shift guard has the flu. We have to split their shifts, so I'm the stat sack relieving Fart Cloud for the foreseeable near-term future. I come in. She's giddy and giggling as she runs out to her car and tears out. I start my shift and wave off her strange sudden giddiness. Partway throughout the extended shift, I wander into the restroom in the booth. The heat is on, and a strange funk odor is permeating the room. There is a used tampon marinating on the heater fins. Okay, maybe she missed the trash. Next up, she left one on the toilet sink, then between the toilet tank and the seat, then the countertop. Then they started getting stashed everywhere like cursed Easter eggs. You never knew where the hell you'd find one. I swapped out a shift with someone and they reported this to the office. Office had previously blown me off by telling me I was being petty or was making it up. Finally, I come in and relieve her. She runs off into the night laughing like she's stoned and I just don't care. I check the chair for surprises before sitting down. Dealing with a lunatic for a week had me not trusting any item or surface in Guard Shacklandia. I drop into the seat and look around wondering where she'd left her gross party favor this time. The microwave had time left on the timer. No. Just fucking no. Yep. I open it up and find the jackpot prize. She had left a mound of used tampons inside the microwave and microwaved the shit out of them. This after having microwaved a fish stick until it was blackened. The stink of that never left that unit until it fried itself in shame and regret. I went to the on-site security office, retrieved the camera, and the office was sent a picture of the microwave tampons. A week later, we're in a group meeting being told we have to be nicer to her, and we're the problem instead. 15 other guards talking about the above behavior of Fart Cloud, and we're the problem instead. 2. Refusing entry. Always a fun game. Kicking people out that have had too much grog is one thing. Usually they accept it in reasonably good grace. Sometimes not. But for the most part, it wasn't too dramatic. Kicking people out that are a bit punchy and causing trouble, a little more annoying in general. We went through a lot of Nokia 3310s, the mobile phone of choice the second it came onto the market for security guards, because of them. You'd have the guy by the collar, arm's length, while you're on the phone to the coppers explaining why they need to come and arrest a guy that just assaulted half a dozen people. The guy would get mouthy or punchy, or just a general dickhead, and inevitably, the hand on his collar would bring him closer. At speed, the hand on the phone would smack him one. The copper would say, "What was that noise?" Sometimes the phone broke. I know, we broke Nokia 3310s, although I did prefer the 5210, waterproof, as long as you didn't drop it in water. It was better at taking a knock, and the case was easy to swap. But refusing entry was another thing entirely. With kicking out, there is some degree of, yeah, I've been a bit of a ghost time I left, and you could exploit and grow that seed to make it easier. Refusing entry is way more annoying, given the person involved doesn't have that thought anywhere near their brain. They think they have the right to enter, and you, as a security guard, are being a terrible bastard for not letting them in the door. The fact that they can barely stand up is irrelevant. Same as when they can't open their eyes properly, or were stumbling in circles, or my favorite, one foot planted on the ground, and the other just wandering aimlessly. Great dance moves there, fella. Didn't matter if they were male or female. Still the same thing. Aggression to get into what's rightfully theirs. Until you convince them otherwise, and no amount of boob or minge display demonstration is going to change the "you're too pissed to go away" into "oh, okay, seeing as you showed and offered me your pussy, you can go in." Seriously, never going to make that change. I don't think non-Aussies understand just how passionate Australians can be about their pubs. Hell, Cole Chisel did a lovely song called Star Hotel about the only genuine riot in Newcastle's history, which happened way back in 1979, when the Star Hotel was due to close forever, licensing issues at midnight. According to a bishop I know, and was there, it's before my time, the police turned up and killed the show early. The crowd rioted, turned police cars over, hospitalized a bunch of them, set fire to anything that vaguely said police on it. Some people got arrested, most didn't. Other cultures riot over things like rights and injustices. We riot over not getting beer. Incidentally, that was a genuine massive concern in 1997. In 1997, the Knights, local Newcastle football team, won the grand final. The moment, and I do mean the moment, that full-time sirens sounded, Tui's and every other beer manufacturer that had beer stocks within a 3 or 4 hour radius of Newcastle loaded every truck they could and went at speed with police escort, at least for the last part of the journey to stop the crowd from helping themselves to the beer, to inner-city Newcastle. Even with the massive overstocking, the crowd was so big and so into drinking that they drank the inner-city pubs dry somewhere around 9 p.m. And after about 2 a.m., the party was still going massive. It went on for several days. But you couldn't get anything alcoholic in any pub, nightclub, butlow within 10-kilometer radius of the Workers' Club, which was the starting point for the piss-up, and is opposite the Star Hotel. Novocastrians brought it back several times. Nowhere in Newcastle had booze, and they were constantly shipping it in. Why? Apart from the money aspect, the police had also brought in a huge contingent of officers, anyone they could lay their hands on. The fear of a crowd of 50,000-plus drunk Australians was formed for rioting over a lack of beer. Anyway, that was a digression into how passionate Aussies are when it comes to their pubs. They'll defend it to the bitter end. Fight anyone who messes with it. Pro tip: you're in a fun pub when the iron bars are on the inside of the windows. Stops the management from having to replace the glass all the time. So when people get refused into their local and they genuinely believe they should be inside, they will stop at nothing. I've had all sorts of violence and intimidation. Favorite was when a frozen chook in a plastic shopping bag got bowled at the front door. Like the bloke was 10-pin bowling. Wound her up and let fly. Missed me, got the bar manager in the ankle. Was on crutches forever. While the injury sucked, how many people do you know that can genuinely say, "I fucked my ankle because of a frozen chicken bowling incident"? You also get the ones where people try to sneak in. If it's an inner city pub, half the time they end up accidentally breaking into the shops either side, and then have to try to figure out how to get out of there, without setting off the alarms but making it into the pub. Or if they can, they jump the fence, which is never a good idea, given that if a suburban pub has a beer garden, and therefore a back fence, it's usually got anti-fence jumping measures. We've thought of that, boys and girls, you're not the first. And it's not accidental. Most of the time they're scrabbling for a good 20 minutes trying to climb a 6-foot fence. And it's how people get anti-pigeon spikes, barbed wire, rose thorns, cactus spines, and all that sort of impaling type of things stuck in themselves. Impaling, never a good thing. The worst injuries for that are always the star pickets. Always. Star pickets are a metal spike, used to tie plants so that they grow up nice and straight. Point a bit in the ground, whack with hammer, tie on, but when falling onto them from a few feet up, they can do damage. Usually it's a decent-sized gash. Whereupon the hapless individual gets a scolding, sent off in the ambulance for some threading, told not to come back until next week. Sometimes it's a bit more serious, because if you land the wrong way on a star picket, you can put it right through the meat of you. That's when you find some idiot you just refused entry to lying in the garden with about 3 feet of metal sticking out of their thigh, and about another 3 feet of metal underneath them, usually in the ground. So you dig out the star picket, curse the idiot for not being more sensible, call a meat truck, and don't let them try to remove it. That's a job to be done at the hospital. It is fun trying to get a drunken idiot into the back of an ambo with a 6-foot metal spear poking through their leg or their arm. But this guy, how he lived is mind-boggling when you think about it. I was working a pub on the edges of the industrial district, just across the railway lines from an old inner-city suburb. It had a beer garden out back with tomato plants that I never ever saw fruit. Anyway, the beer garden was off to the side of the pub, rather than the back, and on the other side of the fence was the railway lines. This bloke, he jumped the fence, cleared it with only a handful of anti-pigeon spikes in his palms. That wasn't the issue, but he more vaulted than scrabbled over. So, as he cleared the fence, the feet got to pointing downward. So far so good. The star picket missed both his feet. Also all good. Missed his knees, all good. Missed his gentleman's sausage and veg, very much all good. But it pierced him, this star picket, a few inches towards the rear. A star picket went straight in, or near enough to anyway, his arsehole. Yep, he copped the star picket to his starfish. It went in with force, came out of his belly button, with bits of intestine and other internal gooiness with a large amount of blood. But he didn't stop there. He continued on his downward journey, tearing into the tomato plant as he went down, which meant chunks of this plant were now in his innards. He stopped when his backside was in the dirt. That was the scene that I came upon. He was busy alternating between trying to pull it out and pull it through. Both bad options. Given he was mightily drunk, but still sober enough to be somewhat coordinated, it was a fun job to keep him calm, keep the crowd back, and convince him not to keep messing with the star picket. Sawing back and forth inside him couldn't have been doing his innards any favors, but moving the crowd back had other unintended consequences. People were naturally curious. Why were other pub-goers so interested in the shrubbery? So they came over to Sticky Beak. Moving the crowd back meant more of a circulation of people than clearing space. There was a handful that took one look, their eyes rolled back in their head and fainted. Most crashed to the deck, most of them face first. Lots of blood and teeth and such on the ground now. So a multitude of meat trucks were needed. One for a guy with the perforated bowel, many for the pub-goers that had lost consciousness and teeth, or broken their noses. One, just for fun I swear, stacked it into the garden and landed in a rose bush. Unfortunately, they came to and started an unholy racket while they tried to extricate themselves, to the sounds of their mates laughing. At least it wasn't Lantana. That shit is evil. It took about an hour to sort out. The biggest headache was getting him out of the pub. Once we'd carefully dug him out, it was clear that we'd never fit him through any of the doors whilst lying on the gurney. Fortunately, there were a few tradies in attendance, and one of them had some tools in his 4x4. An angle grinder with a cut-off wheel was produced, plugged in, and I got the honors of shortening his implement. He squealed mightily when I was doing that. I guess the vibrations weren't fun. Fun making sure the sparks weren't going anywhere to cause further injuries, because do you think we could keep the crowd back? Definitely not a great option, or a long-term solution, but it was the best option we had. Then our hero was even more upset when he realized that the reason I was cutting the picket wasn't to ease its removal. Seriously, that's a hospital job. And I'd left about a foot or so sticking out of either side of him. Didn't need to physically explain it, which would have made for an interesting incident report form. In the end, he went to the hospital. They removed it properly and he survived. The ones that fainted also survived, mostly with flattened noses and prosthetic teeth. Did I get a bonus for emergency surgery? Nope. Damned boss. 3. A few years back, my company was stationed at an abandoned building. Abandoned for a good 20 years, judging by the smell of rotting wood in some offices. Used by the main mail service company of my country, located right next to a train line. Altogether an optimal spot with direct access to the rails for mail distribution and the likes. Fast forward to my company, and me, obviously, appearing on the scene. The company that previously guarded the building was replaced with us, seeing as we were cheaper and with a higher reputation at the time, and one of them remained for another week to show us around. The floor right next to the rails. Pitch black, no windows and no way to close off fence to prevent people from intruding the property. The floor above, also pitch black, save for a few rays of light shining in through gaps in between graffiti covering up the only window. The remaining 4 floors above were all decently lit during the day, but still not optimal, since the windows hadn't been cleaned in the last decade. The building itself had neither power nor water, meaning you couldn't flush the toilets. And not even a heated spot for us despite freezing winter temperatures, meaning that we had to bundle up in blankets during our breaks. Day 1. I had the honors of taking the night shift, only to realize I was all alone save for a phone and a flashlight, having the orders to patrol each floor for at least an hour total before I could return to my office to take a break and warm up. Believe me, I'm not afraid of the dark. It would be quite troublesome in my line of work. But this had led me on edge for the full time of my shift, especially when I was called by a colleague of mine who was stationed in a different location right up the road, telling me that there is a moving light 2 floors above me when I was taking a break. Understandably, I instantly grabbed my phone and called in at my company, only to have 2 cop cars roll up about 10 minutes later. We combed the property, but lo and behold, not even a mouse crossed our path. All we found was a set of new footprints leading down a staircase for the first floor, next to the railroad tracks. After that shift, I was shifting around between other locations for a good week or 2 before returning to the abandoned building. This time for good. My other colleagues had similar encounters, leading to us all calling in at my company HQ in unison, demanding for something to change. You can't just guard 6 floors all by yourself. Even more so when there's no light save for your flashlight to illuminate anything. Our supervisors weren't pleased by a long shot, but promised changes. And who would have thought? Roughly 2 days later, we had a small diesel generator to power at least a few lights installed on the first floor. Yes, the pitch-black hole. And we were told to refuel it ourselves with canisters provided by our company. Guess what? We told the supervisor to come over and join us for the first time the generator needed refueling, just to get a grasp of the situation. On street level, he wasn't quite understanding why we were so adamant with our demands. But the moment we all set foot into the staircase leading down to the first floor, you could almost hear solid bricks falling out of his pants. The moment the door to the staircase closed behind us, it was pitch black. He couldn't even see his own hand in front of his face. Unsurprisingly, the remaining procedure of walking down to the first floor using flashlights went by without him saying a word. Only when we were back outside of the building, he began to apologize profusely, promising us that he'd take things into his own hands to ensure we had a somewhat safe work environment. And a day later, we had a new folder with work instructions waiting for us, stating that we're only supposed to patrol the floors that get lit from the outside the moment the sun sets, and that further changes would happen within the span of about a week. About a week later, we had high-powered LED flashlights that could rival a modern car's headlights for each of us, and the water was turned back on for a men's and women's bathroom next to our office. All in all, not the most amazing changes considering the simple fact that 9 out of 10 cases our shifts were solo shifts, but it was a change in the right direction. So we thought. Other safety hazards popped up daily, such as broken locks at gates, slamming emergency exit doors when I was supposedly alone on patrol, or windows that were propped open with sticks, sometimes ropes or even pieces of scrap metal. Those work conditions continued for roughly 2 more months, until we got a new colleague to join our shift rotations. The problem, he was the type of guy who took all the chairs in the office, built himself a DIY bed and snored most of the shift away, only to then fake his reports, patrol time, special events, you name it, near the end of his shift so he wouldn't get into trouble. How do I know this? On multiple occasions he overslept his alarm, and was only woken up by me gently tapping on his bed with my foot after I saw the empty report sheet. To top that off, he was prone to opening gates that were supposed to stay shut to keep fires from spreading, using fire extinguishers so they wouldn't close again. Same with other doors that were heavy, stating it'd help him do his patrol rounds faster. Did he ever hear about the footnote that we as security guards were supposed to protect and prevent damages from happening? Not risk even bigger damages by negligence? This circus went on for roughly another month, during which he was repeatedly caught snoozing and or blocking doors from closing properly by me, my colleagues, and even our customer. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that we lost that contract within days of said colleague getting caught by our customer, which in turn got said colleague under heavy fire at our company. With so many bright bulbs, I'm honestly baffled that my company still reels in enough contracts that none of us has to go hungry. 4. I worked in a housing and rehab center for men. It was run by the province, and they were long-term residents, not transients. I drove into work and parked where I could see my car from my desk. It wasn't new, 1984 Malibu wagon Battleship Grey, with a 454 big block from a 70 Nova. I needed a length of railway track in the back to keep traction on the rear wheels, but it was my pride and joy. Unfortunately, the brakes were failing and squeaking, so everyone knew when I pulled in that day. The center is run by a former military man who likes to be called Major. He's an ass, so we'll call him Major Bray. His second-in-command, A-Hole, he's so much a brown-noser he's a shithead. A-Hole's wife works as a receptionist because nepotism. She's terrible at her job and never listens. When I walk into the office, the Major is there with 2 new hires, Be Gone and See Ya. The Major says to train them tonight. I've been there less than 2 months, but was still probationary myself. I asked where Jack is, my usual partner, and was told he called in sick. Great. So the Major leaves, and I'm trying to get a handle on the new guys. You see, you only find 3 types of security here: the big guy, the fast guy, and the smart guy. There's only 2 of us after hours, and ideally all 3 groups are covered by 2 guys. Jack is big. I'm smart and fast. These guys were not big. So Mrs. Hole walks out and says, "Jack off tonight?" I respond with a glib, "I don't do that at work." Mrs. Hull smiles and nods and walks out. My new hires don't react either. Scratch smart. I get my new guys set up in the TV room and told them to break up any fights. Then I hear a strange sound coming from the side of the building. I leave my guys and go outside to investigate. I did mention that I was still new. I find 3 residents trying to break into the fire exit. They've got bags in their hands, cheeks flushed, a slight red to the nose. I tell them to stop trying to rip the door open and leave for the evening. Alcohol is not allowed inside. Well, they did not like that, and the 3 moved towards me in unison. 2 of these guys were short and wiry, and 1 is big. Big leads with a left haymaker. I've tangled with all 3 of these guys before, and seen them in altercations with others. I know what to expect, but Big seems faster. I barely avoid that first punch. I rabbit short in the nose, it bursts into blood, and he runs off crying. I get wiry between me and Big, and he takes a hit meant for me, and he's on the ground. Big moves in again, and I can't avoid him this time. He grabs me, so I take it to the ground and try to get a lock. Any lock, but can't. We're rolling on the ground, down the side of the building to the front where everyone can see. We're making a lot of noise. Big ends up pinning my legs, but then starts to get up. Lying on my back, I kick up as hard as I can, right between his legs, and knock that mother back 5 feet. He doesn't flinch. Well, fuck me. I roll to my feet and run for the door, yelling for my guys to call the cops. Call the cops! I burst through the door, then slam it and pull up on the bar and keep it from opening. Big is only moments behind me and is now slamming on the door, shaking the whole building, it seems. My new hires are nowhere to be seen, so I'm left holding the door until Big loses interest and starts to wander off down the street. One of the residents promises to hold the door closed while I go call the police, and I find my new hires hiding in the office. When the fighting started, they apparently ran fast to get inside the office. The police arrive shortly, and I give a statement. They know Big, and so they drive off to catch their man. Short and wiry are not seen for the rest of the story. The next day, the police come back to talk to me and tell me an interesting tale. They found Big wandering down in the middle of the street and tried to arrest him. He resisted. The 2 officers were not able to contain him, so called for backup. The second pair were no more successful than the first, and so another pair are called. The 6 officers are finally able to subdue him and get him into the back of a car. On the drive to the station, Big pulls at the corner of the cage between the front and back, and tries his best to strangle the driver. At the station, it takes another 8 officers to get him into lockup. They perform a blood test on him, and that's how I first learned about PCP. A few days later, I was driving down a steep hill, and guess who was crossing the street at the bottom of the hill? I knew that if I was just a little late pressing the brakes, I wouldn't stop on time. I was sorely tempted. 5. So a while ago, I had worked as a supervisor for a security firm that was, I can't say it differently, utter trash. It was mobile services, so my security officers would tour their route and patrol over client objects during the night, reporting abnormalities, sometimes closing the buildings at a certain time, and all kinds of minor tasks. This produced a lot of crazy stories, since there was a lot of personnel turnover and many questionable people. But one story in particular has left me baffled. The way things were handled in this firm was that the keys were all bound to a huge metal chain with thick wire. Professional, right? I had brought up countless times that we should upgrade to an alarm suitcase, don't know the correct English word, that would track a missing key if the car moved. But nobody wanted to agree on spending any money. Did I mention this is a horrible company? I had gotten into the role of supervising rather by accident, since nobody else would do it, and I started troubleshooting, giving directions if needed, etc. So one day the manager just told me I was a supervisor, without proper training or anything. That made me also in charge of training our new hires. I was lucky if these people even understood half of what I was saying due to language difficulties. That made the rather easy job very hard to explain. One night I took a new guy with me to show him the route, the objects, and the general procedure. Right from the start he seemed to be skeptical. I showed him everything regardless, and he seemed to get the gist. The next night, I told him to drive and walk the way he remembered, and I'd help him correct him. So we finished our first object, which was a school. It went all right-ish, but he asked me every single time why we had to do this the way we did, when it was faster to ignore most of the things we came for and just walk by everything we had to check. It was a total fight. When we stepped out of the building, I told him the last step, which is to make a final check on the main door from outside and scan the last checkpoint located there. He agreed and promptly dropped the keychain onto the ground next to the car. I stopped him and told him that he must never let these keys lay around, since it would cost a fortune if the companies all had to change their locks in case of theft. He started arguing that they were heavy and annoying. I told him that yes, but it was part of the job. Also, if he didn't need them, to lock them in the small safe in the car. Apparently this was too much for him. He lashed out at me, screaming, cussing me out, his voice echoing through the empty street. He used a total of 3 languages, and at one point very colourfully compared me to a certain dictator from not too long ago in my country's history. I just stared at him, took the chain, got in the car, and drove off. On my way to the next destination, I called my manager, told him what had happened, and that I would consider picking him up at the end of my shift. He just laughed. The only good thing about him was that he was just as sick of those guys as me. I calmly finished my shift, even taking my break in peace, and when I returned, he was sitting on the sidewalk, majorly pissed. I rolled down the window, told him if he said anything during the ride I'd throw him out, and made him agree before unlocking the door. We drove back in silence, and I told him he didn't need to come back the next night. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Insecurity number 1. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Now, before you lock up for the night, please do input your security code by clicking on the like button and possibly leaving a comment. If you'd like to see more videos of this or the other types I do, then please do click subscribe. Right, this is Saturday. Right. We'll see about spinning plates for tomorrow. Don't quite have the stories for it yet. Getting there, but not quite there. Partially recorded. Well, I was going to do some gardening this weekend, but it's a bit dull, so maybe not that. I might get on my bike and cycle up the street and get a couple of groceries. I could do with a couple of things, I just don't need everything. Starting to get a bit of that wanderlust, and I've not been out for a couple of weeks, so probably about time. Should hopefully have the regular Hellfreezer Saturday stream tonight. Of course, if you're listening to this at a random point in the future, that will mean nothing to you because I'm recording this on the 15th, Saturday 15th. So, future person, you can just ignore this. I don't know when the next stream will be as to when you're listening to this. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.